Just after 1 in the morning on June 6, 1944, a private named Nobody in Particular is lying in the wrong field in Normandy. He does not know that yet. He knows only that the plane shook, the light came on, and he jumped into total darkness over what was supposed to be a drop zone behind Utah Beach. He lands hard in a pasture. He cuts himself out of his harness. He is alone. Across a wide stretch of the Norman countryside that night, large portions of the 82nd and 100 Honest Airborne Divisions came down far from their designated drop zones, scattered by poor weather, anti-aircraft fire, and pilots flying blind through cloud they had not trained for. Some units ended up spread across an area nearly 20 miles wide. Many officers who studied the drop patterns afterward worried that a scattering on that scale could have crippled the entire airborne mission before it started. An army that cannot find itself struggles to fight as an army. It risks fighting instead as a few hundred separate, frightened, well-armed individuals. That is not entirely what happened. Within hours, many of those scattered men had found each other, formed into ad hoc squads under whatever officer or sergeant they happened to land near, and begun taking and holding objectives that had been assigned to units they had never met. Historians generally credit this recovery to a combination of things: hard training, aggressive junior leadership, sheer luck, and the equipment those men carried. Among that equipment was a piece of gear small enough to strap to a man's chest, weighing about 5 pounds. Built specifically to let one soldier talk to another nearby soldier without a wire, a runner, or a radio truck. This is the story of that piece of equipment, the man who helped build it, and the army on the other side of the hedgerow that never fielded anything quite like it at the same scale. To understand why a 5-pound radio mattered, you have to understand what the United States Army did not have at the start of the war. In 1940, an American infantry squad of around 12 men had no organic radio of its own. If a squad leader needed to tell his platoon commander that a machine gun nest had just opened up 50 yards to his left, his options were a hand signal, a shout, or a runner sent across open ground while bullets were already moving in the other direction. Communication above the platoon level ran mostly on field telephone wire, strung by hand, often under fire, and on backpack radio sets so heavy and unreliable that the Army's own pre-war practice treated them as something issued at the battalion level, not handed down to the rifleman crawling toward a German foxhole. The problem was not unique to the Americans. Every army of 1940 faced the same physics. A radio that could carry a clear voice signal needed power. Power needed batteries and vacuum tubes. Batteries and tubes needed weight. Weight needed a strong back. And for most armies, a radio strapped to a strong back stayed at company headquarters, not at the front of a rifle platoon. The shift began with a contract the Army Signal Corps issued in 1942 to a Chicago company called Galvin Manufacturing, which the world would later know by the name it adopted after the war, Motorola. The Signal Corps wanted a portable transmitter receiver one soldier could carry on his back, rugged enough to survive mud and rough handling, weighing no more than 35 pounds loaded. Engineer Daniel Noble led the project team at Galvin, and under his direction, the engineers made an unusual choice. The Army's existing portable sets ran on amplitude modulation, AM, the same approach used in most pre-war civilian radios. AM was simple, but vulnerable to the electrical noise a battlefield produces in abundance: engine ignition, artillery fire, atmospheric static. Noble's team believed frequency modulation, FM, still a comparatively new and unproven technology for a portable military set, could cut through that noise far better. It was a real gamble for a wartime contract. The radio that came out of it was designated the SCR-300. Working on Noble's team was a Polish engineer named Henryk Magnuski, and his presence in that Chicago laboratory is its own piece of history worth sitting with. Magnuski was born in Warsaw in 1909, lost both of his parents while still young, and supported himself and his sister as a teenager by repairing and installing radios for the Polish military. He earned his engineering degree from the Warsaw University of Technology in 1934 and went on to lead a team designing military radio sets for Poland's own armed forces. In June of 1939, his employer sent him to New York for what was meant to be a 3-month study trip to examine the latest American transmitter designs. 2 months later, Germany invaded Poland. Magnuski never went home. He joined Galvin Manufacturing in 1940 and became the project's principal RF engineer, the man largely responsible for the radio's frequency design. Within 2 years, the Polish engineer who could no longer return to his own country was building the device that would let American infantry squads talk to each other across the hedgerows of a country he had never seen, against the army that had taken his. The SCR-300 went through Signal Corps acceptance trials at Fort Knox, Kentucky, in 1942, run through woods and open fields to test range, durability, and voice clarity under conditions meant to resemble combat. It passed, and full production followed through 1943 and 1944. By the time the war ended, Galvin had built somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 of them. Each one operated on the FM band between 40 and 48 megahertz, with a circuit called automatic frequency control that helped keep the receiver locked on the correct frequency without constant manual retuning, an important reliability feature, though not one that made the set foolproof for an untrained operator. Range, depending on terrain, ran from about 3 to as much as 8 miles, well beyond the roughly 1-mile range of the smaller handheld set the Army also fielded, the SCR-536, nicknamed the Handy Talkie. Together, the two radios let the Army organize communication down to a level few, if any, other armies matched at the same scale. The SCR-300, a 35-pound backpack, went down to company and platoon level, carried by a single soldier. The SCR-536, a 5-pound handheld set, went down toward the squad itself, with roughly 130,000 built over the course of the war. An American squad in 1944 could, at least in principle, put a voice on the air without waiting for permission to climb several rungs up a command ladder first. Now look at the other side of the hedgerow. The German army was not without portable radios. It fielded a set called the Torn.Fu-Die-D2 AVHF backpack transceiver with range and frequency performance broadly comparable to the SCR-300, but the way it was carried often differed. According to period technical references, the set could be split between 2 soldiers on the move, one carrying the transmitter receiver, and the other, the battery and handset, linked by a cable, although exact practice varied by unit and circumstance. Below that set, German infantry used smaller units in the Feldfunksprecher series, lower-powered sets, with effective ranges closer to 1.5 miles under good conditions. What Germany did not field, for most of the war, was a true equivalent of the SCR-536, a small, handheld set issued routinely down to the individual squad in comparable numbers. The closest thing it eventually fielded was a small set called the Kleinfunksprecher D, nicknamed the Dorette, built not by a German firm but by Philips, the Dutch electronics company, operating under German occupation. The Dorette did not reach service until around October of 1944, less than 7 months before the war in Europe ended, and never in numbers approaching what the United States had already issued years earlier. What that gap most plausibly changed was not raw firepower, but the flow of decisions. A German rifle company commander, relying on a 2-man backpack set or on field telephone wire that artillery routinely cut, was often a man waiting on information to travel up a chain of command, and in order to travel back down before he could act. An American squad leader carrying an SCR-536 had, at least in principle, a more direct path to call for help, report a threat, or coordinate with the unit next to him. Whether that translated into a decisive battlefield advantage in any single engagement is hard to prove from a single radio model alone. What can be said with confidence is that the United States Army built and trained around a doctrine of small unit initiative, the idea that a sergeant on the ground given enough information and enough authority, could often make a faster and better informed call than a colonel several miles to the rear. That doctrine depended on training, junior leadership, artillery support, and logistics as much as on equipment. The radios did not create small unit initiative by themselves. They gave it a far better chance of actually working once the shooting started. None of the men who carried these radios into combat thought of themselves as part of a historic shift in communications doctrine. They thought of the SCR-300 as something heavy that hurt their backs, and the SCR-536 as something that sometimes worked, sometimes failed when its batteries got wet, and was worth having anyway. Daniel Noble received the Army's Certificate of Merit for his role in the project. Henryk Magnuski, the engineer who helped build it without knowing whether his own country would still exist when the war ended, stayed in the United States, became a director of research at the company that grew out of Galvin Manufacturing, and was eventually inducted into the Illinois Engineering Hall of Fame. Decades after the radio he helped design had become one small but real part of how scattered American units found their footing in the dark fields above Utah Beach, on a night when the plan had already gone wrong, and a voice on a 5-pound radio was, for some of those men, the only thing still working at all. If a story like this matters to you, a like keeps it in front of the people who still want to know how these things actually worked. Subscribe if you want the next one.